Okay, I have to thank our audience at large and Steve who texted me and Russ who came in and everybody's doing it. As you can see, we've been just totally focused on creating all these great tools for you guys that I haven't read up on as much as I should have at this point. But I'm telling you guys, it's a great thing, obviously, tri-party agreement. But the deal is that the board will have the option to not be part of
the brokerage.
Yeah, the
brokerage.
Is it the brokerage or the board, Russ?
The board.
The board.
Oh, the board.
Yeah, so CREB, not individually. The board will have the option to stay in or out with area. That's with the provincial board. So that's that. That's the deal. So, Charles is making his way across.
Thank you. That was Charles, everybody.
Bringing water to our guest.
Thanks.
Okay, so back on to the subject at hand. Tricia.
Yes.
Tricia Hickey is here with area.
RECA.
Oh,
Lindsay, you got to get off. You're out. That was your third strike. You're out.
You do the introduction.
I'm going to do the introduction. Lindsay, you know you didn't have a good sleep. You were up at 4. Poor guy. Anyways, he's better than this, everybody. So anyway, he's better than this. So Tricia's here because and I have to, specifically Aaron O'Mara, one of our realtors who was at the event, but I heard great things from everybody, sent me an email and was like, Kirsten, you weren't here. Tricia did this absolutely incredible job. We didn't have a ton of our agents there, but they got to hear it. So asked me to reach out to you, and you said yes. So you're going to be doing a little bit of a pared down version of your red flags presentation that you did at the board.
Yes.
So a little bit about you. So you've been with RECA for 8 years.
Yes.
And you are a senior
Professional Conduct Review Officer.
Professional Conduct Review Officer. That's great. And one of the neat things about your job, you were saying, is you do the down and dirty, intentional, legit fraud.
Yeah, so in the investigations unit or the professional conduct unit, the files are divided into 2 different sections. One is intake in that, and just to kind of assess the files and see the severity of it. And then if it's determined that it's a serious file, then it gets moved to the unit that I'm in. And so I deal with frauds or allegations of fraud, intention to deceive, forgeries, that type of thing.
Sounds like a James Bond movie. For mortgages.
Just with paperwork. Yeah.
Tricia, intention to deceive.
That's right.
So we're going to let you get into this. So you're going to be seeing Tricia's slides. If you have any questions, we can't see them on right here, but Charles is monitoring the chat. So if there's any questions that he is able to answer, please feel free to type them in, and he's going to be engaging with you that way. If there are any questions that are a little bit more than a couple fingers can type quickly, they're very happy to reach out to you and do a phone call for any serious questions later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sound fair?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's switch over to your slides, Tricia, and we will get started.
Okay, so I've tried to pare this down because the presentation that I do involves, we provide examples from some of the files that I've seen over the years. So the reason I chose straw buyer fraud, because there's a lot of different frauds that are out there. But with straw buyer fraud, it is something that is preventable, and it takes a lot of players in order for the scheme to actually be successful. So I'm going to explain all the different types of players that are needed in order for straw buyer fraud to occur. And just to give an example, because a lot of people think that straw buyer fraud involves in a hot market. That's true, it does, but it's also in the slow market. So to give you an example, recently, so this year in 2018, I've already had 2 files that have come across my desk that involve straw buyers.
Wow.
When that occurs, what it does is it often will unravel, and it's going to reveal a bunch of properties, because a lot of times people don't just do, oh, let's just try it this one time and let's see if it works.
Right.
There's actually a lot more that come into it. So what I'm hoping that you'll take away from this brief presentation is understanding how straw buyer fraud works, the players that are needed for it to work, and the impact on the industry, as well as how you can avoid being a participant. So something to remember is one of the goals of fraud is to have people carry out their part in the transaction without knowing it's fraud. So if somebody can get you to do something with as little information as possible being given to you, you're a great candidate for them.
Interesting.
So what is a straw buyer in relation to real estate? It's somebody who is willing to put their name on a property, to purchase a property that they have no real intention of purchasing or necessarily living in. So who can be targeted? Absolutely anybody can be. So it can be people who are in need of money, low income, but we've also seen lots of high income earners that are also participants in it. We've seen both immigrants and non-immigrants. It's really not something that's targeted for any specific individual. Literally, absolutely anybody can. I did this presentation at the banks, and there's bank employees that have been straw buyers.
Wow.
Wow.
Every single person can be a straw buyer. It's just how good is that person when they're trying to convince you to play a part in their role. So how are straw buyers found? Absolutely anywhere. Common areas are churches or temples, sports groups, and coworkers. And the reason why is because these are a network of people, and this is a group. So if one person within one of these groups becomes a straw buyer, then what do? Well, they tell their friends, oh, well, you know, John told me about this great opportunity to make a quick $3,000 to $5,000. And somebody says, oh, but did it work? Yes. Okay, now they go to John. So now you have this network that occurs. And so you have a whole bunch of straw buyers that are coming out of the same group. We've also seen homeless people as well as drug users and dealers that are in there. The drug dealers are a little bit different because it's a coercion type thing. You owe a debt, and so you need to pay that off. And so that's how come sometimes they become straw buyers as well. So why would someone become a straw buyer is a big one. So the most common answer that we get is that they believe that they were helping somebody out. Oftentimes it's going to be presented to them as something altruistic. You know what, could you help me out here? And you'll hear numerous different stories. I have too many houses that I've already purchased and the banks won't let me get any more. Would you just be able to help me out? I need to purchase this real quick and I'll give you some money for it. Well, now it's a two-part, right? Now you get to help somebody out, but you also get a reward for doing it. Mm-hmm. But they justify it by helping somebody out. Some people need quick money. In this economy, you know, lots of people are really hurting for money. And also if you want to, if somebody is sick or you need additional funds in general, if you want to bring somebody over to Canada, that's a very motivating factor for that quick amount of money. Sometimes greed just plays a part.
Yeah, just want to make a quick buck.
Yeah. And sometimes it's cultural respect. So sometimes we'll see an elder person in a community will go and talk with a younger person. And sometimes that's how come they get involved. And they are, you know, taught to listen, really.
Right.
And sometimes that owes the debt, so in relation to the drug dealers. So if money is paid, and it's not always paid, but if it is, it's usually anywhere between $3,000 to $8,000 on your first purchase as a straw buyer. It usually goes down after that. So a lot of times straw buyers will be used more than once, and sometimes they'll only get paid on one transaction. Sometimes they won't even know that their names have been put on other transactions because the person already realizes that they can be used.
Right.
Yeah. So how does it work? So we've briefly already touched on this, that there's an element of personal gain justified by helping somebody else out. So the steps in the scheme are to find a buyer, to find a property, secure the mortgage, and then distribute the profits. That's the main gist of it. So I'm going to present a slide on a whole bunch of players. It's unfortunate you guys can't see that slide because there's a lot.
Yeah.
And just something to remember is that an individual can play more than one or two or three roles. I have seen somebody play about 4 roles in here, so you can play as many as you want.
Tell you what we're going to do.
Okay.
Slide this over slightly. There we go.
Okay, so the more players, the better, really. So it starts off with the mastermind. So this is a person that's going to come up with the scheme. They know the ins and outs. They have a plan of what they're going to be doing. There needs to be a recruiter. This needs to be somebody who's going to go and find the straw buyer for somebody. And this is going to be the contact person for the straw buyer. Remember that people need to know as little as possible in order for them to play a part. So the recruiter may have been told, listen, can you get me some people that might be interested in making a quick, $3,000? Just get me their names and their driver's licenses, and then I'll do the rest. That's all they know, and at that point, does it sound like fraud? It sounds like enough that we might raise some questions,
right,
but maybe not to everybody.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So then you need somebody who's willing to check somebody's credit to see if they're an eligible candidate in order to become the straw buyer. The credit checker doesn't always have to be the person who's actually going to process the mortgage. The more diluted they can make it, the better. So they do want to try and distance that a bit.
Right.
The intervening purchaser is the person, so there's going to be a legitimate seller selling their house at market value. There needs to be somebody who's buying it at market value. And then there's a straw buyer that comes in after that, because that's where the inflation of the price comes in. So the intervening purchaser is purchasing from the legitimate seller. So this is where the fraud takes place after the intervening purchaser sells the property to the straw buyer. An intervening purchaser can also be a straw buyer, but they need to have some sort of connection to the mastermind, because that's where all your funds are.
Right.
That's who's going to distribute it after it gets transferred from the lawyer's office. You need a real estate associate. Oftentimes things need to be put onto the MLS system. You need a bank associate or a mortgage broker who's going to process the actual loan. You need somebody who's going to create the mortgage documents. With the exception of high-income straw buyers, which is rare, I'm going to say maybe 5% of the straw buyers that come through would be the more high income. Their documents in general will often be legitimate because there's no need for them to forge them because the income is so high.
Right.
But on the lower incomes, they're qualifying for mortgages. They're not going to qualify for legitimately, so they need somebody who's going to create documents for their mortgages.
Like income verification, things
Yes.
like that? Yeah.
Notice of assessments, job letters, payroll. So you have the document handler. So the document handler has to get the document from the person who creates the forged document and has to get it to either the real estate associate or to the bank associate because it has to transfer somehow in there. Then you have a lawyer for once everything is signed off, as well as at the bank. Now in all of this, you finally have your straw buyer, but you're the pawn.
Yeah.
But the straw buyer isn't needed for anything else in there. It's just they're just a name, and I'm going to explain why. So their only connection is that recruiter in the majority of the situations, and then they're going to be told to go to the bank to sign off on the documents, and as well as go to the lawyers. So the different positions that I've seen realtors play a part in is in the mastermind where they've thought up the entire scheme. I've seen them be the recruiter, the intervening purchaser, obviously the real estate associate, as well as the document handler. So after recruitment, this is how it kind of plays out. So you need to have a recruiter that's going to find a straw buyer. When they find the straw buyer, they're going to ask them for their identification and probably their social insurance number. And the reason why is because they now need to go and get the credit checked by the credit checker, and they need to establish if this individual is a good candidate to purchase a mortgage. So the straw buyer gives their ID over. That's all they know. They just know that their ID has been handed to somebody else. So now somebody has to find a property. So to find a property, you can find it in a community that's going through a transition or one where you have a house that says the basement isn't renovated and then on the next listing it is suddenly renovated or something becomes a legal suite. All different ways to alter it in order to increase the value of the property. So what we do is we have a legitimate seller who's going to sell the property to an intervening purchaser, for instance, for $350,000. The intervening purchaser is then going to sell it to the straw buyer for, let's say, an inflated price of $450,000. Now, these numbers are not out of whack. I have trust ledgers in that show how much people actually do profit in these. Now, the reason that this has an identification behind it is because the straw buyer doesn't know that their name has been put on a purchase contract, and their name may be removed off of one purchase contract and put onto another. They're just a name at this point.
Right.
So their documents are often forged. They have no idea that there's a purchase contract out there with their name. So after they find the property, they now have to go and get the documents created. So somebody has to get those documents to the document creator who's going to have the person's ID and probably the purchase contract. So that's something for a real estate associate to think about. Well, what happens, like, who is your contact person that you're giving these documents to? Just food for thought on that. So then the straw buyer is told that they're going to need to go to the bank and the lawyer's office. And they're told that by the recruiter. That's because that's their point of contact. So in here, the recruiter recruits the straw buyer who then gets their identification. The recruiter takes their identification and goes and gets it checked by the credit checker. Then the property has been found. Now, a real estate associate is involved, but you'll see in this, the real estate associate is not talking to the straw buyer, and they're not talking to necessarily anybody. We don't know. It's oftentimes a referral source that they're going to be talking to. So then a purchase contract is drafted up somehow between a legitimate seller and an intervening purchaser. Then there's going to be one between the intervening purchaser and the straw buyer. So in a slower market, there's going to be a delay between these purchase contracts. So oftentimes, the purchase contract will be held for a year or 2 years, and the property will be rented out or a grow-up or something. It's used for
So the legitimate
something.
buyer does close on the property.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, well, the intervening purchaser.
The intervening purchaser. Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. That's
They
right.
are going to close, and then they're going to hold that property
Right.
for as long as they can. So that might be where another straw buyer is holding that property.
Right.
And then they're going to wait until they can get some profit and then turn around and sell it and inflate it. So they'll probably just wait until that market picks up again.
Right.
So now you need your document creator who then is going to create the documents for the straw buyer. And then somebody has to get those documents over to the mortgage associate. This is where I've seen lots of times the realtor is actually the document handler. They're the ones that are handing it over to the mortgage associate. So one of the things to think about is if your referral source is asking you to go and hand documents to the bank or the mortgage associate, why? Why is that buyer not doing that
Yes.
in a normal transaction?
Yes.
If you're asked to do favors, again, why are those being asked of you? Those are the types of questions that real estate associates need to ask. And we're seeing, especially in markets where people are, they're very excited to get a listing and very excited to close a deal. Sometimes we don't want to ask questions in the fear that we don't want to hear what is going to be said. But it's very important that we do ask the questions because that makes us so vulnerable when we don't.
Right.
So after all of that is said and done, the recruiter now has to tell the straw buyer that they need to go to the bank and then they go to the lawyer's office. So when we go through this, the straw buyer only talks to the recruiter, the bank, and the lawyer, not the mortgage associate or the bank associate who originally submits all the documents, not the real estate associate. So who's representing this person? So something I had mentioned at the beginning is one of the goals of fraud is to have people carry out their part in the transaction without knowing it's fraud. So I'll give some different excuses that we have heard as to how real estate associates have unknowingly participated as the seller's representative. So different excuses, and they're told that these are big clients that are going to be producing for them, and they really hype them up. So they need these properties to be listed right away because they need to sell them. They're going to give the associate lots of business. They're renovating units, so need to list units to sell off quickly to continue to renovate others. List units in a quick amount of time without allowing associate to view each unit prior to listing. Now, just back to that third point there, renovating units, no need to list units or to sell off quickly. Sometimes that can be legitimate. Sometimes that can truly be. You just have to ask questions around it, really. So encourage associates to use the pictures from one of the units for the rest of the units. Feeds lots of information and discourages the associate from double checking. So they're constantly reassuring the associate. Yes, no, I got this. You know what, I do this all the time. Yeah. No, like this is my 5th property that I deal with, and that they will know what they're talking about. So it sounds legitimate to believe them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and another one that we get is you're doing somebody a favor. Now, when this comes in, sometimes it's actually another real estate associate asking a real estate associate to do them a favor. You always got to ask yourself, why are they asking me to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
When is a favor just a favor? And also that they may want a low fee. So real estate associates who unknowingly have participated as a buyer's or seller's representative. So this is when you have a referral source that's doing the majority of the talking. does all the talking, gets the required forms signed for the real estate associate. So the real estate associate doesn't actually talk to the person who's signing the forms or doesn't see them signing the forms. Okay? Has an explanation for all delays. So if you need an extension signed or financing isn't coming through, the referral source is explaining why that's happening. They know, and it sounds very believable.
So they're never actually seeing the buyer or talking to the buyer.
No. Sometimes, if a real estate associate really pushes,
Yeah, FinTrack, things like that.
yeah, they can see the associate, but the buyer. But if it's a straw buyer, oftentimes they're going to know such little information that if the real estate associate just asks them a bunch of questions, even, oh, well, when did you get the form signed that I had sent, through the referral source, they're going to not have any idea because their names are already forged anyways, or they have been told just sign here, sign here, sign here.
Yep.
So explains reasons for client being unavailable. They have to leave town really quick, or they don't speak English or something. Mm-hmm. Discourages or prevents any direct contact with the client in general. So they want to try and do all the talking. And even sometimes they'll meet up with a person and then they do all the talking. Why are they doing all the talking? You don't get a chance to know your client then. Reassures the real estate associate throughout the transactions, of course you can trust me. Of course, why would I ever hurt you? Encourages the real estate, to trust them. So what are the impacts on the industry? So it breaks trust in the industry. The banks start flagging the brokers or agents involved. I can't stress that one enough. Your reputation is absolutely everything out there. If the banks start flagging you, your deals might just suddenly be rejected from certain banks. You're not going to necessarily know why, because they're not going to come out and tell you. But if your name starts getting used on properties that have been known for straw buyers and that, there's a reason that they'll flag you. So you need to really do your due diligence. Nobody likes to be investigated.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where I come in. Your reputation is absolutely everything. Social media is rampant these days.
Yep.
Once that gets out there, that's very hard to break. Additional regulation gets added in. Nobody likes all those forms, but there's a reason that they're there.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And due to the lack of due diligence, you could be a participant. So the impacts on the straw buyer has little to no knowledge of the property or what happened. They don't know who to trust. There's all these people that were involved in getting their house, the bank, the lawyers, the realtors, the mortgage associates or bank associates, all these people, and that trusted source, that recruiter. So who do they trust now? And why didn't anybody stop this? That's a really common question that we get. How come nobody stopped? How come nobody knew? I didn't meet anybody. And everything for them is on them. So the mortgage, CRA, CMHC, everything is on them now.
And they went in and they signed at the lawyer,
Yes.
and they signed at the bank. So this is on them.
That's right.
It's like you bought this house.
Yeah. And if they received any money, there is no chance for them to sue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So also they have to, there's recourse there. So they're sued for deficiencies if this happens. Foreclosed on, they can never purchase a house again at high ratio mortgage insurance. Anxiety and depression, suicidal. So for real estate associates, these are some things for red flags to watch out for on who you're representing. So if someone other than the buyer or seller is doing all the talking for them, such as the referral source, start asking yourself why. If somebody is providing you with the signed documents that you should be getting signed, one, why are you asking somebody else to go and get those forms signed? You also don't know if those forms are being explained to the other person.
Right.
But it's very questionable when you're getting somebody else to be signing, especially all your forms when you haven't met them. Asking you to deliver documents to the mortgage broker, you could unknowingly now be a document handler and part of that scheme. You're helping somebody out just to close your deal. Last minute tells you the buyer or someone else's name, perhaps a family member, now needs to be the purchaser. Well, where did those people come in? And why have I not been talking to them the whole time?
Totally.
Dictates to you about the listing and advises there's no need to double check everything, has an answer for absolutely everything. The seller shows you only one unit but asks you to list more than that. Client appears to be coached, unable to answer unexpected questions if you do get an opportunity to speak with them. And other real estate associates on the other side of the transaction isn't able to answer unexpected questions. If this is the case, do more due diligence to protect your client.
Nice.
One more slide. How can this be avoided? Keep yourselves educated. Ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Always meet who you are representing. Always pull title on the property being purchased. That's also going to show you if there's an intervening purchaser to make sure your seller is legitimate. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Be prepared to walk away from a deal. I know that's very, very difficult, but that is important. And trust your gut instincts, but verify them. And that is it.
Tricia, that was so great. And I just wanted to make a quick note that obviously there's a lot of information on here, and Tricia has agreed to share her presentation with us. So this is something that we can send out and also post on our document section of our virtual office so that you guys can have a little bit of a reference point if you want to go through this too.
Yes.
So just one final question for you here. So if someone suspects that they're dealing in this situation, who do they call?
So we ideally ask you
Obviously,
can
broker
call
first and then.
right. Talk to your broker, see what they advise. If you think that fraud is suspected, please do notify us. I know sometimes calling RECA can be scary. So even after my presentation that I had done at CREB, some people reached out to me individually. I am more than happy just to take a quick look at a transaction without starting a file necessarily, just to kind of give us
the red
a
flags are there. Or,
yeah. And then if there is, I'll advise you and say, yeah, you know what, I'd really like to take a look at this, and we go from there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Tricia,
That's great. Thank you very much for coming.
for all the great information. And
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I don't know if Charles got some questions there or a few things, but all good. And anything else that we can't get done, obviously Tricia's information is on there. Will be on the slides, and you guys can contact her later. But we'll be right back talking about the engagement marketing grid.